Good afternoon. My presentation in the African literature paper is Gabriel Okara's Postcolonial Vision in his two poems, You Laughed and Laughed and Laughed, and The Piano and the Drums. This is my personal information. Introduction. Beginning with what is postcolonialism literature. According to M.H. Abraham, a critical analysis of the history, culture, literature, and modes of discourse that are specific to the former colonies of England, Spain, France, and other European imperial powers, these studies have focused especially on the third world countries in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean island, and South Africa. And MacLeod says that post-colonialism is a phenomenon that emphasizes on the idea of disorientation, which is valuable and productive process that aims at derailing the accustomed train of thought. Post-colonial literature can be identified easily as a rejection of the master narrative and the agenda which has an agenda to de-establish Eurocentric norms of literary and artistic value. African literature, according to Kahinde, in African literature there is an ugly period of colonialism which has affected Africa, the people's language, education, religion, artistic sensibilities, and popular culture. African literature, which is post colonial, is informative, meaningful, and instructive in shedding lights on the experience of the marginalized and dispossessed communities. Major writers in the Africa started writing their thoughts, which resulted into the rise of a negritude movement in Africa, which was to apprise the European that the culture and the tradition of the Africa are not inferior and is capable of producing high quality and towering literature. As we are going to discuss the African poet Gabriel Okara and his two poems. Introduction to the poet. Gabriel Okara was a Nigerian poet and is considered the first modernist poet of Anglophone Africa. Majorly in his work, he drew on African thought, religion, folklore, and imageries, and he is also known as the Nigerian negritude. According to the editor of his collected poems, Brenda Osbe, it is with the publication of Gabriel Okara's first poem that Nigerian literature in English and modern African poetry in this language can be said truly to has begun. The poetry of Gabriel Okara majorly depicts that the surrendered are trying to retrieve their loss. Beginning with his poem The Piano and the Drums. Okara in his writing majorly portrays the fear of losing one's heritage and identity and discuss the effect of colonization in Africa. The title itself of the poem shows the cultural dichotomy through the musical instrument, that is piano and the drums. The drum indicates the traditional African drums, while the piano represents the Western world which is complex in culture and tradition. One of the major theme of post-colonial literature is tension between the two, colonized and the colonizer. And this poem very effectively depicts the tension between the one-time colonized area, that is Africa. There is a clash between the traditional African culture and the influence of the Western culture. The one theme which can be considered of post-colonial literature is a sense of displacement and alienation in the people who are colonized. And the very first line of the poem, that is when at the break of day at a riverside, and then the narrator further in the poem is in the memory of his culture of Africa and remembering his older days, and suddenly there comes a voice of wailing piano which delegates him, due to which the narrator feels like an outsider of his own culture and is unable to fully connect to any of the culture, that is of Africa or Western traditions. Here we see that the narrator in the poem is completely wandering, which the last stanza of the poem also suggests. And I lost in the morning mist of an age at a riverside cape, wandering in the mystic rhythm of jungle drums and concerto, which symbolizes, which depicts that he is wandering between the two cultures and is completely lost. So we can say that this poem by Gabriel Okara is a gives us the idea of post-colonialism in the Africa, and how people of Africa, the black people, are wandering and trying to come up with the loss of their culture and tradition. The another poem, who laughed, you laughed and laughed and laughed. In this poem, we find the power dynamic between the Africa and the West. This poem depicts the pain, suffering, and the emotional turmoil of the black people. In this poem, the poem has several lines like "You laughed at my song, my walk, my dance, my insight," which suggests that how the white people were belittling and insulting or insulting to the African and their primitive way of living and culture. But once when the African got their own life, that is when they got freedom from the white, they got it was their turn to life, turn to laugh. That was, now it's my turn to laugh, but my laughter is not ice block laughter. Here the laughter of white people was written as ice block laughter, the laughter which has no sympathy and had an insulting tone, while the laughter of black was of fire, was of passion, and it thawed your inside, that it melted the white people from inside. And in the last stanza, the Gabriel Okara indicates that the land is there because my fathers and I owned by the living warmth of the earth through our naked feet. The land belonged to them, and so their laughter was full of fire, full of passion. Here we see that Okara in this poem reveals the dual attitude of the colonizers toward Africa, that is, exploiting them while also displaying humiliating and insulting behavior. In this poem, the post colonial themes like having a power dynamic which is reversed further, and the resistance power of the black makes this poem a post colonial poem. In the conclusion, I would like to say that, as Abraham said, that post-colonial literature is analysis of history, culture, literature of the former colonies. And in this both poem, Gabriel Okara is giving us an influence of the white on the African culture, that how they were trying to get over the African culture. And as per the MacLeod defined, that post-colonialism is a phenomenon that emphasizes on disorientation and aims derailing the accustomed trains of thought. As we saw that in the poem, the piano and the drums, the narrator is completely disoriented. He is not able to connect to any of the culture or tradition. And in the next poem, which is "You laughed and laughed and laughed," they are trying to come out of the thoughts which are already settled by the white people. In this poem, the master narratives of colonialism is disrupted through the description of narration and dramatization of the condition of the colonized in a colonial setup. So we can say that Gabriel Okara successfully subverts the stereotypes, inaccuracies, and generalization of the white colonizers regarding the Africans, which are in circulation through his description and narration. These are my citation. Thank you.
Can you say that Gabriel is one of the racism victim? So that this concept of two culture is coming time and again in his works.
We can consider that Gabriel Okara himself has been victim of racism, but he himself is himself belongs to Africa. He is a Nigerian poet, and he might have personally faced or personally was affected by the colonization of the white people. And so we can say that his poetry is trying to bring out the post-colonial effect, through what the Africa is going after the sudden freedom from the white.
Says my question is how does Gabriel Okara use the literary device such as imaginary symbolism and contrast between the two poems post-colonialism?
Yes. Talking about the imagery, symbolism, and the contrast in these two poems, the piano and the drum itself, the title itself has an imagery of piano and the drums. That is, the piano is imagery of Western civilization, and drum is becoming the imagery for the African or a black people. And also in the poem, the you laughed and laughed and laughed, the metaphor is used for the laughing, that the laughter of white is known as ice rocked or ice blocked laughter. I don't know. I'm not remembering the specific word. And while the laughter of black people or African after freedom is no is given a metaphor of the fire. So that's it. Thank you.